Thank you very much. And welcome to the session about the future of global technology and policy development. So this is actually a topic of two main questions, right? What is the future of global technology and what is the future of policy development? So we will cover both of them. I am surrounded here by thought leadership. I'm surrounded by people who apply it in their real life. So let me just introduce the team a little bit. We have Ivana, hopefully I pronounced the name correctly, Bataletti, right? You've written your own book. You have created a fellowship, an association for women who focus on policy creation. You are a thought leader yourself in your field, especially in AI. So I presume AI is linked with cybersecurity and blockchain and all these technology sets, right? We have Cezanne. You are mainly focusing on Uber in terms of policy implementation. So you are a receiver of policy.
Yes.
Right? We have Ala, which is a link between public sector and government sector, right? And so I want to start off with a difficult question. Since we have an audience that is both the receiver and creator of policies and the receiver of regulations. So the short image you have in front of you now, I think is coming here, is a short overview. If you can turn the slide, it's a short overview on the life cycles of policies, why we have policies, right? So that's the short introduction. We have a government, we have the citizens, we have business world, we have the financial world, and there's a cycle, a hidden promise between each other, right? They promise security, workforce, between the different elements, right? So, Cezanne, you're in the element where you are part of the business, right? You are the element, you're a service provider, so you are a business, but you're also creating the link between these. You are sitting right in the middle. You are trying to create the policies ecosystem and link the world together, right? Yes. So let me ask you, Ala, can you explain in simple terms what is policies and what are regulations?
Yeah, thank you, Henrik. I'm very honored here to present the Digital Cooperation Organization in this panel alongside with my esteemed colleague. So in simple words, when we are going to say policy are things that you want and plan as an organization to do and aim to do. Regulations are are you going to implement them. So one will provide the general topic, the other one will provide how it's going to be implemented as a regulation. And usually people comply to regulations, and it provides more context on how it's going to be implemented. So this is in very plain, simple words.
Yes. You're also a mother, right?
Yeah.
So could you explain in a simple example, like a mother,
yeah,
what is the difference between a policy and a regulation?
So yes, when you say that, for example, my kid's using the internet, and now with this openness and having that accessibility to electronics and internet, so having a general policy where you say, okay, you have to use it in a very balanced way, but then to have a regulation that they have to comply is 2 hours a day. You have to comply to that. This is how a regulation is set.
Yes, that's a very good example, right? A policy is a directional view, right? It's an area on how much you can use the television. A regulation is that somebody needs to implement it towards the children to say 2 hours, that's 2 hours, or the television needs to turn off. Cezanne, you are a receiver of a policy, right?
Yes.
So how does that shape Uber's, what is your experience with Uber's relationship in the different regions around the regulations and policies?
Yeah, thank you so much, Henrik. We've had an interesting journey, and I think if I think back to when we first started doing policy work at Uber, one of our biggest tasks was really working with governments and agencies in order to help them be educated about the role of technology, and specifically the role of technology in mobility. And so a lot of the process has really been about helping them to figure out how they need to modernize transport regulations or even develop brand new regulations in order to be able to account for companies with business models like ours. I think we've of course started with transport at the base of it, but since then we've evolved into so many other different topics like labor, like data, like tax, and so it's a continuously evolving field.
So regulations can be a blessing and a curse for you.
100%.
Yes. So how do you see the future in terms of how regulations will enable Uber to grow or to be inhibited to grow?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big things that we look for when we work with governments, because it's such a new field, because technology is something that's quickly evolving, and it's something that people are struggling to understand and also have a lot of foresight on, what we have to be really careful with on the regulatory environment is to make sure that it's not too rigid, that we have a fair market as much as possible in order for technology and companies to be able to evolve, to be able to adapt, to be able to be flexible. And so especially coming from the government side, in order to enable these kinds of flexible, slightly more open policies and not be too rigid by copying and pasting something from somewhere else, there's certainly got to be that openness towards being educated, towards collaborating with the private sector, towards really also building that capacity within government so that the thinking is there, that policy making is driven by data, driven by facts, driven by information, and not just how someone feels or what their personal opinions are.
Yeah. So, Ivana, you are within an organization that develops solutions to adapt the regulations, right? So, how are you focusing on this to enable organizations to adapt policies and gain an advantage of that?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Does it work? Yes, great. So it's a really interesting question, and I think it's great to be on this panel also because, there are 3 female thought leaders is a really good thing. So I just wanted to say, I think we've gone through lots of different phases, haven't we, around the world? So we've gone through a sort of phase of self-regulation where, in the internet, in the web spaces, we've left companies self-regulate. And I think now, we've seen that that's not enough, and I think all companies agree that that's not enough, and in the last few years we've seen some amazing things, but we've also seen some of the harms that come from that, and I talk as a privacy person. Then we've gone on to sort of the more sort of government-led regulation. We've seen the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, and now we've seen 120 legislation around the world, for example, governing privacy. And now I think, in looking at sort of co-regulation where you have the responsibility of business alongside the responsibility of government. Now within all this, Whipper is a leader in the space of solutions to all of this. And now that's interesting because the challenges that organizations have at the moment is how you really future-proof the innovation that you put out. Because the issue is, let's take, for example, artificial intelligence or automated decision-making, thinking, for example, how that is important to Uber in your work. Then the issue is that regulation is changing and quite rapidly. We don't know yet how much the law is going to govern a lot of these things. We have, for example, on algorithmic decision making, you have data protection authorities all around the world saying, this is about transparency, this is about explainability. Then you have specific legislation about artificial intelligence. So I think a lot of companies, they have some really fantastic stuff, but they say, well, there is an issue here. How do I actually future-proof what I'm doing so that I can actually deal with really rapid changing policy, rapid changing regulation around the world, and also with a lot of convergence around the world. We have a lot of convergence, but there is also a lot of divergence. If I look at the privacy side, we agree on the big themes, but there is also a lot of divergence and a lot of differences around the world. So I think the key point that I'm trying to make here is that that it's really important to code a lot of these regulations into the design of what we do. To me, that is a priority number one, because the more that you're able to embed all the regulatory elements, privacy legislation, for example, using and leveraging privacy engineering, privacy technology to make sure that these things actually happen by default. Otherwise, companies would be overwhelmed and trying to then come in and say, oh, we have to amend this or amend that. And to me, the key point is that I always, I sound like a bit of a, I always say this, but we've got to break, this silo culture that we have between the legal teams doing the law and the regulation, the technical team doing all the technical changes. We speak different languages, and that's not right. We've got to speak the same language. So I think the way that, we do it, I do it within my organization, is to create the spaces where we can learn the same language, so that if I talk about algorithmic decision making, lawyers can understand me, technical teams can understand me, and we can achieve together the solution. To me, that is the way forward on this.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And this is the heart of what we are as an organization here, to create that ecosystem where we bring on the table the government, the public sector, the private sector, all of them together on the same table from different countries, to really create the correct set of policies that will enable us to have that more growth in economy, in digital economy, in emerging technologies, because at the end, the efficient way in implementing any policy is to have that hand in hand with the consumer, with the public sector, with the private sector, all of us on the same table. Because at the end, if you have a policy that it is not implementable, so we saw all the cost of having that, and the cost of not having that alignment between government and non-government, having each one of them working alone, having the development being done on one side and then the implementation on the other side. So you saw, as you said, issues in data privacy, digital taxations, and much more coming. We are talking about a really evolving area. Things are accelerating in the digital economy and in the technology very quickly. And in the future coming now, we have to realize that 70% in the next decade of the total GDP will be from digital economy and emerging technology and that growth. So if we cannot have the correct set of policies, if we do not create that ecosystem where everyone, the correct people, as you said, from legal, from technical, from government, from policymakers, all of them hearing each other and understanding what is needed, we will be behind.
That is an amazing point, because you also highlight that the centerpiece of policies is human beings, right? That's why a government creates policies to protect the information sharing, to protect the human beings, to protect the interest of the country and the resources and the human beings that are there, right? So I've done over 19 strategies for country, for digitalization in industry 4.0 implementations. One thing I have learned in policies that are the same, the natures of policies is always reactive. The nature of policies and regulations are only focusing on best practices, never industry practices or never leading practices. Do you think that the future of policies has to adapt to something else, or do you think that it can maintain the same modus of apparatus, or do you think it will change? That's an open question for all three of you.
Do you want to start? Or
Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking, when you were speaking and you were saying, really, you made a really excellent point, I agree, being reactive. And this is particularly in the space of technology.
Yes.
It was quite something to watch, for example, when in the US, the senators and the congressmen and women were interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, that there was a complete mismatch between what they knew about tech and what Facebook does. The reason why I'm saying this is because there's also an element of lack of understanding from policymakers, and I'm thinking, for example, how long it took to get the sort of general data protection regulation in Europe. Now I think all countries are catching up across the globe. They are catching up because they're realizing that they're realizing that there are issues around, for example, privacy, on sort of the online abuse or issues around competition and how that intersects with privacy. So they are stepping up. There is obviously a reactive element. one area that I find extremely important, where I find policy that really needs to is the area of, as you said earlier, the area around data sharing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've had in Europe the famous case around Schrems, which basically invalidated the mechanism sharing between the EU and the US. We are confusing, in a lot of places, data protection with data protectionism, which in my view is problematic. And I do think that, we need to find innovative ways to share data, global solutions around this, and this is really important. The Elizabeth Denham, who used to be the information commissioner in the UK before leaving, she said we need a new Bretton Woods of data at global level. But we do need to find a global way that, yes, we invest in our technological and digital sovereignty, but at the same time, we are able to share data in a way that does protect the right to people, but also allows us to really harness this information.
That's a good point, and I will leave it there because we'll turn on to the next slide, but I just want to conclude what you said, right? So sharing policies across is an advantage in everything where you are non-core. Everything where you are in a country specific and you compete, that is where you will not share, because you have to be minimum as good as the other one. Policy is a two-edged sword. One is you protect your own interest, and you use it also as a competitive force. For every country always competes with other country. Let us try the next slide, because we're turning now the topics into the global trends that are coming. So if I can have the next slide. This is just a head summary. Can I have the next slide?
Nothing happening.
Yalla yalla habibi. Good. Can somebody wake the guy up so he can put the next slide on? Can we have the next slide? Very good. Very good. Good. This is a summary of the fourth industrial revolution, 3 worlds colliding together, digital, virtual, and the physical world together, right? They bring the cyber-physical world, they bring the metaverse, they bring the multiverse, right? You see here on the red side, these red ones are 17 technology sets. One of it is digitalization, one of it is AI. Some of them are merging really fast, right? Bioinformatics, quantum technology, and all of these ones. They are all ones that we'll see. What you don't see here, the topic I want to cover here on policy, is that our world that we know today is changing, fundamentally changing. We saw Stephen here before talking about social media and how big he came to social media. Let me tell you, in 2 years, social media will be not the same, not even close to. Because what is hidden between these messages, you have Web 3.0 you are in now, where you are in the information. Web 4.0 is where you will be the holder of the information via blockchain. So you will still be on social media, but in a different environment where you control the data, you control the information. That's why a big social media company is rapidly trying to push over there and take over the storyline, but that will fundamentally change policy making forever.
Exactly, and if I may add to that, as you said, things are really accelerating and moving very quickly, and they are changing. And we have saw it in COVID, how we were before and how we are after. And to show the scale of what is happening, you can see internet traffic. It is reaching a peak level of 24 times more than pre-COVID. People has been using social media, video platforms, 50 to 100% more. So this shows how much it is impacting our lives. At the end, you see we are sitting in a very hyper-connected conference room with 5G connectivity. Although there is 1/3 of the world, almost 3 billion in population of people are remaining offline. This is a very huge issue. We have to have those policies in place and work together to ensure inclusivity, to ensure that women, elderly, people with disabilities, all of them has the access and has the ability to digitally prosper.
Yes. Sisan, how can Uber take advantage of policy making of the new global trends that are coming?
That's a great question, and I think to be prepared as a company, it's important for us to really have that foresight and really be able to immerse ourselves within the ecosystem of people who are thinking about the fourth industrial revolution, who are thinking about these future trends, because the only way that we can educate policymakers and work to be as effective as we can is if we understand it ourselves. I think we're very much concentrating on the business, on the core, on growing, and if you don't really put that intention and effort to learning about what's coming down the pipe, then it's going to be difficult for you as a company to be prepared. So I think that's something that we definitely have to do a lot more of.
Yes. So we live in a time, we are the most blessed generations of all, right? And part of this is also because we have more education, we have more knowledge, we have more technology, right? We have more equal rights, many of this, right? Do you think, Ivana, that with policies we can guide us in the right direction to be in balance with ourselves, with nature, and with technology?
Well, I'm an optimistic, so I would say yes. But I'm an optimistic because I always focus and like to focus more on the things that we have in common across the world rather than the things that drive us apart.
Absolutely.
And having been for 20 years in privacy from a business side, but also as an activist in the past and still, I noticed that these 120 privacy regulations that we have, they all mention fairness, they all mention transparency, they all mention responsibility. When I look at the 180 policies around artificial intelligence and strategies around the world, they all mention explainability, responsibility. So yes, I mean, we do have a world that has its differences and its political challenges, but we also have all of this in common. And I think we should focus on this and have the courage to create smart policies and smart regulation together with business, where really we can harness this technology for the common good of the world. And that's, I think, something that we really need to do, and I really would like to see countries heading in this direction.
And this is why we are here as a digital cooperation organization, to create that ecosystem.
Exactly.
We are actually looking at having all of those parties on one table.
So do you have a piece of advice for the audience as your last words? What is your piece of advice? How they can shape the policy and the technology, how they can adapt to themselves where they are, right?
I believe efficient policies should be created with having in mind international and collaboration between each and every country and each and every party, from private sector, from civil society. So this is the most important thing, and this is us as a digital cooperation organization, this is our priority, is to really work together, to collaborate, to provide that multilateralism where we really multilateral organization that really brings people together to enable digital prosperity for everyone.
Susan?
Yeah, I think the world is getting only more complicated. So really, to the policymakers out there, keep it simple, keep it digestible, so that people can really understand what their rights are, and make the policies and regulations easy to follow.
To the businesses, I would say embrace it.
Yeah.
Embrace it, because I think companies that can innovate, embrace digital transformation, but at the same time, safeguard and enhance people's dignity and their rights by doing so, are the companies that are going to have a massive competitive edge. So I would say embrace it. Don't be fearful of policies and how it's, and invest in the privacy by design, in the regulatory aspect by design, so that we can code all of this. This is an amazing challenge for company ahead, but that's the direction of travel is going to be this way. You know, with 120 privacy policies, that's the direction of travel. People say privacy is dead. I'm so sorry, it's not. And it's really important, I think, that the companies embrace this and they're able to gain their competitive advantages by bringing together innovation and responsibility and privacy.
So please give them a big hand, right? Each of them are thought leaders in their field, right? We have one that influences policy making. We have one that is a consumer of it, that applies the regulations, and we have one that is a solution provider. I'm a firm believer that we need to scale down on the COVID policies. We need to renew our thinking about how we do policies, how we regulate. The more ability we have to be free, the more ability we have to innovate. There's a principle in policy making. You have to bring one in and take one out. That is one principle we actually don't apply in now. I believe each of us live in the greatest time of all, right? Policies give us a guideline to where we can work within, right? And each time we hit the boundaries of that, we have to extend the boundaries. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the next session. Take some time with these ladies afterwards. Thank you.